Hello, I'm Donovan Simpson, and I'd like to talk to you about something that I am very passionate about: creating more Amtrak service across Indiana, including our three largest cities, Evansville, Indianapolis, and Fort Wayne. The current state of passenger rail throughout Indiana is quite sad, in my opinion, and I think it would be in anybody's opinion as well. There are about three different tracks that Amtrak follows. There's one that goes through the heart of Indiana, but it only does this 3 days a week. And then one that goes along the northern edge of Indiana, and then this one that stays along the edge of Lake Michigan. And since this one along the northern edge of Indiana is a daily service, but it's so far north, it pretty much excludes everything south of it. And then the one that goes through Indianapolis, it's only 3 days a week, so it doesn't help most of the people who need flexible schedules to travel. And then, even more so, nothing south of Indianapolis has any passenger rail at all. And so people in the south portion of Indiana just don't have access to public transportation to get them anywhere that they need to go. This concerns me a lot. And I'll talk to you about why I think passenger rail is so important a little bit later. But first, I want to show you the map that I've put together and the route that I propose. So these blue lines here are the route that currently Amtrak follows. And then the yellow routes are new routes that the Federal Railroad Administration has recently issued grants for. These grants are really important, but they're not actually saying that these routes are going to happen. The purpose of these grants right now is to have whatever entity applied for the grant, it had to be a political entity, have that entity study what would passenger rail service be like. Now, there were 4 grants that applied to Indiana, and I know I only have 2 yellow, but I'll explain the other 2 as well. One of them is to go from Chicago to Fort Wayne, and then out to Columbus, and then further to Pittsburgh. That would be a brand new service connecting the second largest city in Indiana. And then the other one that's a brand new service would go from Indianapolis down to Louisville. And there's a rumor that it would stop in Columbus and Jeffersonville before it gets to Louisville. Those are helpful, right? Because obviously the one to Fort Wayne connects the second largest city, but it doesn't actually connect it to anything else in Indiana. And then to go from Indianapolis down to Louisville is again helpful, but if the rumor is correct and there's a stop in Columbus and then in Jeffersonville, you're still excluding a huge portion of southern Indiana and not connecting very much of Indiana to itself, right? The other 2 grants that were issued pertain to the Chicago, Indianapolis, and on to Cincinnati corridor. The existing Cardinal service is what it's called. It would take the Cardinal and turn it into a full daily service instead of just a 3 days a week service. And then the second grant, we assume, would connect Chicago just to Indianapolis during better times of day, because the Cardinal only runs at night. And again, that's not the most helpful for some people who need flexible schedules. As part of that grant, it also seems like they would explore adding a brand new stop to the Indianapolis International Airport. You can see that there's an existing set of tracks that run right next to the Indianapolis Airport. And the state of Indiana did a study back in 2019 that said that adding a stop here would cost about $16 million, including the building itself, all the new tracks and everything that it would take to run that new station. So those are all really, really great things, and I don't want to be a naysayer on any of that. It's just not enough for the state of Indiana to stop there, in my opinion. So my proposal would be to run one more route that goes from the southwest corner of Indiana up to the northeast corner of Indiana in Fort Wayne. I have a few options that this could follow, but what's most important to identify up front is all of these tracks already exist. My map here, which you can find a link to inside the petition, you can see it actually does follow the existing set of tracks that connect all of these cities together. Aside from maybe one or two spots where you'd have to add, a new turn like this one to connect one set of tracks that cross to another, the routes are already laid. So in detail, I would propose one station in Evansville, and then it can either go more directly up to Indianapolis, a shorter route, a more direct route through Oakland City, Maysville, Washington, Bloomfield, Bloomington, and then Indianapolis. Or it can follow the western edge of Indiana, go up to Princeton, Vincennes, Oaktown, Sullivan, and then turn over and again hit Bloomfield, Bloomington, and up to Indianapolis. And then on the north side, it could go through Anderson and then either over to Muncie, Hartford, Bluffton, and then Fort Wayne, or again, still through Anderson, then Marion, Huntington, and off to Fort Wayne. I'm just proposing certain stops along the way. I'm sure the state of Indiana would want to evaluate whether there need to be a stop at every one of these locations. But generally speaking, I tried to add a stop about once every 25 miles along the track, because 25 miles is probably the point where you would say, no, I'll just drive instead of taking the train. So this, I think, is a great route to add, and in addition to the existing FRA grants, this would connect all of Indiana. Every corner of Indiana would have Amtrak service throughout it, and you could get anywhere you needed to go to any other part of Indiana. This boosts tourism and a few other things. I want to show this before I get to my list of reasons why I think this is important, but you may not even know where the stop in Indianapolis is right now. This red building is the Indianapolis Union Station, and it's right next door to Lucas Oil and Baker's Life Fieldhouse, right? You can also go to the monument, the circle right in the center of Indianapolis. So it's really close to the center of Indianapolis. It's walkable to anywhere that you need to be. And that's quite different from taking a flight, because with a flight, you're way out here at the international airport, and you'd have to find an Uber or a taxi or something to get you into downtown Indianapolis, whereas the train is just right there. Now, Indianapolis, there's a really great history on Indianapolis's Union Station if you wanted to go out and look at it on Wikipedia, including the architecture, how it came to be, the history of how it was built, including the fact that it was the very first Union Station anywhere in the United States of America. Although Columbus, Ohio was able to build theirs and complete it first, Indianapolis was still the first one to come up with the idea and begin it. And by 1900, there were over 200 trains per day going through Indianapolis Union Station. I think that means Indiana wasn't just the crossroads of America because of roads for cars. Indianapolis was the crossroads of America because of trains. There was a lot of traffic going through Indianapolis. You can see, some of all of the different routes that went through Indianapolis. You could go, anywhere that you needed through Indianapolis. There was a decline, and it eventually fell into the current state that it's in right now, but I'm confident that with more investment in trains throughout Indiana, the Union Station could become the great thing that it was back in the day. Fort Wayne also still has its Penn Station. Nothing's happened to it. It's on the historical preservation list throughout the U.S., and they do take really great care of this. It's still along the edge of the tracks. It could still be used and turned back into a modern train station. I think passenger train is important for a lot of reasons. And I'll tell you the reason that I got turned on to trains initially. When I traveled to Germany for the very first time about a year and a half ago, I took a passenger train for the very first time on that trip. And I was going from Frankfurt to Cologne. And that particular trip has the fastest train within the German network, going from Frankfurt to Cologne. It goes 200 miles an hour, and I was completely unprepared for it. I had no idea that I was about to go that fast. I just thought I was getting on a train, that it was going to be slow moving, kind of like the ones that we use here, but all of my coworkers told me to book a train trip rather than try and get an Uber or something else, and so that's what I did. The moment that we started going 200 miles an hour, I was just dumbfounded at why the US doesn't have something like this. Now, I'm not saying that we have to have high-speed trains right now today. High-speed trains are an investment that takes years and years, probably even decades, to work up to. But you have to take small steps in order to get there. And those small steps include just having passenger trains. And we don't. We just don't have any. Start with small trips. Go from Fort Wayne to Indianapolis. Go from Fort Wayne to Chicago. Go from Evansville to Indianapolis. Indianapolis to Louisville. Those are important intermediate steps. And then over time, there will be more demand for them to go faster, to increase throughput for more passengers to take those same trips. That's when you start to migrate over to high-speed trains, because you know which routes are the most popular for people to take, and those are the ones you prioritize for high speed. Now, on my petition, I have a list of the things that are most important that make me say this is why we need trains. The first one is traffic reduction. You can carry loads more passengers on one set of tracks than you could with a 4-laned road. So by reducing the number of cars on the road, we can also reduce the costs of those roads, the amount of concrete that we have in our cities, and instead you can have more green spaces. Your cities can be more walkable. There's also going to be fewer car accidents, and I'll talk about the safety a little bit below. But when you're driving, you don't have to worry about a drunk driver. Taking the train can boost tourism. There are plenty of residents or Hoosiers or even out-of-staters who would love to come into Indiana and see everything that we have to offer. Maybe they want to go into Indianapolis to go to a concert at Lucas Oil. Or maybe they want to go down to Evansville to visit, our museums or our casinos. Those are all reasons why people might just want to hop on a train and take a train trip. Driving means that you can't have a really great time while you're there. You're not able to drive because you want to drink, but you can't drink and drive. There's not very many flights throughout Indiana, and even if there were, they would be very expensive. Trains are, generally speaking, a lot less expensive than taking a flight. And that accessibility is really important as well. So I've got some photos that I can show you of the newest Amtrak cars, but you can fit a whole wheelchair through the aisle on a train. You can't do that on an airplane. So you also can get more people to travel this way, and it's inclusive. It's not just, whoever can afford it or whoever, can drive can get to where they need to go. On the safety topic, there is a study by the Indiana Department of Transportation during their 2021 state rail plan, and they show clearly that taking a motor vehicle is significantly deadlier than taking an Amtrak train. Per 100 million passenger miles, 1.42 people tend to die, whereas on an Amtrak train, it's 0.03. It's even better than taking a flight. A flight is 0.2. So taking the train is far safer for you. It opens up educational opportunities. You can go to universities, including going to IU in Bloomington, which, the train would stop in Bloomington ideally. You're able to get more residents of Indiana to our universities, and they can go home during the breaks. You know, who wants to go home during Christmas, but maybe they don't have a car, or maybe their car broke down? You can still make it to and from using the train. Business development. Lots of businesses want to send people throughout the state, and offering, you know, a train is going to be one of the most convenient and efficient means of transportation for those businesses. This creates jobs. You know, in Beech Grove, Indiana, we have one of the largest Amtrak facilities. It supplies, you know, everything from air conditioning units to toilet paper for Amtrak. But we barely have any Amtrak service in Indiana. By creating more Amtrak service throughout Indiana, you'll create more jobs for Amtrak, but also the rail carriers that need to maintain the tracks. You're also going to have to create more jobs for all of the tourist businesses in the state. You know, with more traffic coming in through the train, you have to be able to field more customers. And I know environmental sustainability isn't important to everyone, but to those that it is important to, trains are one of the greenest forms of transportation that we have. And you might wonder, is that just if it's an electric train? No. Even the diesel engines that Amtrak is getting right now are more carbon emission friendly than electric cars. There's a great study on this. You know, you can find it on the Our World in Data. And I originally focused on the UK, but all of the numbers do apply to Amtrak, including the National Rail. You can see that per passenger, taking the train emits 35 carbon dioxide equivalent per passenger kilometer, whereas taking an electric car is 47. And if you compare that to taking a gas car, a diesel, or even flying, it's just not even a fair comparison, frankly. Taking the train is the greenest form of transportation that we have to go throughout the country, interstate wide. And then last, you know, you might start comparing the exact amount of time that it takes to take the train versus driving, and you might say, well, it takes a little bit longer to ride on a train than it does to drive there. But what you're missing out on that is the fact that a train trip is a productive use of time. Because you're taking a means of ground transportation, you still have access to all of your cell phone networks. You don't have to put your phone in airplane mode like you do when you're flying. You don't have to pay for Wi-Fi because the Wi-Fi on the train is free and included in the trip, which means that the entire trip you can either spend your time working on a laptop or, you know, on your cell phone, or you could just be watching your favorite TV show. There's outlets on the train with the free Wi-Fi. The entire trip is something where you're doing something with your time and not just holding a steering wheel staring out a window, right? And I think that's one of the best things. And even if you don't want to, you know, use your cell phone or your laptop, that's okay too. You've got a giant window next to you where you can just watch all of the beautiful scenery and take in everything that Indiana has to offer along the way. I also have some really great photos of the newest cars that Amtrak is bringing into rotation. These are called the Amtrak Venture cars. They've got some really nice staircases. The seats are very comfortable. In fact, according to what was found by the Points Guy, a very popular travel website, the seats on these Amtrak trains are just as comfortable and just as spacious and recline just as far as the first class seats on many American Airlines flights. There are accessible features of these, plenty of space to pull in wheelchairs. I told you already you can fit a wheelchair throughout the whole aisle down the train. The bathrooms are very clean, modern, with no-touch sinks. The tray tables fold down and you can fit a whole laptop on them, and there's outlets at every single seat so you can keep your things on charge. And you see there's massive windows on the sides of these trains. So with all of that, I really hope that you agree with me that this is something that's really important that we should bring to our state, not just my route, but also the routes that the FRA has issued grants for. And, if I excited you enough, you should even go near the bottom of my petition. I have a link where you can find your senator and your representative, get their email addresses, and then a short little bit of text where you can send them my petition and make sure that they know that this is important to their constituents, right? So sign my petition, go the extra step, send this to your representatives, to your senators, and make sure that they know this is something that we want for our state. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.